Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're breaking down the Thursday Night Football Showdown slate for tonight, or tomorrow night, whenever you're watching this video, over on Draftkings. Gotta say, not super excited for this game. It's only a 44-point over-under. We got two pretty strong defenses facing off. Buccaneers are not going to have Chris Godwin, so I'm not expecting a super high-scoring affair here, but we got some decent names to work with. We got Allen Robinson, we got Mike Evans, we got Tom Brady's always got some good name values, coming off a huge game as well. And you got the corpse of Rob Gronkowski, too. So it's not the worst game in the world, but it's definitely not the most exciting one. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could leave a like. If you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. We're all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. If you follow me over on social media, handles on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, that's always much appreciated. You get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, which if you guys want to know what it looks like, well, I guess here's a small sample size on the screen right now, but I have my first look video, my final thoughts video. Those are always on there as well. And you can hop into the Discord chat too. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I feel like these guys are a little bit overpriced, but nothing really we can really do about it. We always have to have interest in the quarterbacks on a showdown slate. I think you could get away with pivoting off of these guys, but they're always the safer plays, and there are some nice value plays at wide receiver to make it not that hard to fit these guys in. But just I overall think they're a bit pricey here because they're not in very good matchups, and their team totals are 23.75 and 20.25. So not expecting a ton of points to be scored by either one of these guys, but again, quarterbacks always have the safest floors, and Tom Brady's coming off a huge 5-touchdown game where he had 36.5 Draftkings points, and I think he's fine. He's throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game, nearly 300 passing yards per game, and nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game, but the matchup is brutal. They're 5th DVA versus the pass, and only allowing 12.6 Draftkings points per game allowed to quarterbacks, which is one of the lowest in the entire league. So I wouldn't say Tom Brady's going to come out here and absolutely smash, but he's okay. His team has the higher team total, not by much, but by 3.5 points, I should say. And he's okay. I feel like he's a bit overpriced, but again, quarterback on a showdown slate always got to have some interest. I wouldn't say I love him in the captain spot because that's a lot of money to pay for someone I don't really think is going to absolutely crush. I'd probably rather go with one of the skill position players, but again, he's fine in the flex spot. Nick Foles, 10,000, kind of the same thing. I mean, he hasn't really been great this year. He has 4 touchdowns in 2 games, but I don't know. It's just another bad matchup here. Like, pretty much everyone I'm going to have listed on this slate is in a bad matchup because Chicago's a good defense and Tampa Bay's a pretty good defense. So you're not going to really run into any soft matchups here. But Nick Foles, he's $1,200 cheaper. He's going to be playing from behind, not really by much according to Vegas. But I would expect the Buccaneers to win this game. But Foles is okay, but then again, the Buccaneers, they are 4th DVA versus the pass. They're allowing 17.7 DraftKings points per game allowed to quarterbacks, which is a bit softer than the Bears, and 271 passing yards per game as well. So he's okay, but I don't really love either of these guys. But again, on a showdown slate, you got to have some interest in the quarterbacks because they're pretty safe, but not really looking to put either in my captain spot. I've not tried to build a lineup yet, but I just feel like they're not going to fit too well in there. Moving on to the running backs, we got up top, we have David Montgomery at 7,800, who's the clear RB1 on this offense, especially with Tariq Cohen being on the IR. But I mean, Montgomery's okay, but this is a pretty tough matchup here versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were very strong versus the run last season. That's carrying over once again. Their 2nd DVA versus the run, allowing 24.6 DraftKings points per game to running backs, but only 46 rushing yards per game and 0.75 rushing touchdowns per game. They're giving up some receiving work to the running backs, which I guess David Montgomery could do a little bit of damage for the year. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers this season, only 2.75 targets per game and 23 receiving yards, but with no Tariq Cohen, I guess that opens up a little bit. But he's okay. I mean, the price is fine. Only 54 rushing yards per game on 13.5 attempts, but I mean, he's going to get some volume here, but I'm not expecting anything huge. And I can say that for a lot of these guys. Again, the matchup is pretty brutal, but we're going to be forced to play these guys. But he's okay. I mean, it's an RB1. He's going to get volume, and that's good enough for me at 7,800. Ronald Jones, 7,400. Looks like Leonard Fournette is doubtful for this game, and LaShawn McCoy is going to be out, so it's going to be him and Keyshawn Vaughn. So you can probably fire up Ronald Jones with some confidence here. He had over 20 carries last week. Or sorry, I meant over 20 total touches. He had 20 rushing attempts last week and 6 catches on 9 targets, which is great to see. and he actually had 111 yards rushing. Did not get into the end zone, but if you're going to get me 20, 25, 20, 30 touches here, you can sign me up for Ronald Jones at 7,400. The matchup's not great versus Chicago, but they are 16th DVA versus the run, allowing 24.1 DraftKings points per game to running backs and 102 rushing yards per game and a rushing touchdown per game. So Ronald Jones, he's going to be one of the best plays on the entire slate here. You're getting RB1 volume. He's a talented running back, and he's 7,400. So yeah, I think he's in a pretty good spot here, and definitely a candidate to make the captain spot as well. Looking at his numbers this season, he's getting 14 rushing attempts per game, 63 rushing yards per game, 4.5 targets per game. And also keep in mind, Leonard Fournette is not more than likely going to be playing in this game, and he's got 8 rushing attempts per game. So you can kind of take that out and just kind of funnel that to Ronald Jones and a little bit in Keyshawn Vaughn as well. Like I said, LaShawn McCoy, he's not going to be playing either. Vaughn, he's okay. He's $1,000. He's going to be involved, but it shouldn't be anything too crazy. But for $1,000, you don't have to be an RB1 for sure. But a handful of touches, maybe he finds himself into the end zone, kind of what he did last week. He only had 3 rushing attempts last week for 4 yards, but he did have a receiving touchdown on 3 targets. And he did play 25% of the snaps, and these are going to be the 2 running backs here, Ronald Jones and Vaughn. And $1,000 is not the worst play in the world. I think he's a fine value play. Then after that, you really just can't trust any of these guys. Maybe one of them just gets a random touchdown, but it's not anything you can really bank on for the most part. And you can't play Tariq Cohen because he's not going to be playing either. But moving on to the wide receiver position, we have Allen Robson at 10,600. Super expensive, but definitely one of the better plays on this slate. I mean, he's one of the more talented wide receivers in all of football. And he was definitely the garbage man last week, doing a lot of his damage in garbage time when the Bears were trailing. But the past 2 weeks, he saw 13 targets and 10 targets. Hasn't had anything lower than 9 targets per game so far this season. And so I like the volume. And again, super talented wide receiver, getting over 10 targets per game, 6.5 catches per game, a 26% target share, 32% market share of the team's air yards, 471 air yards on the season, 63% weighted opportunity share. So the numbers are good for Allen Robinson. He's a very good receiver. I don't love the matchup here versus Tampa Bay. Only a slight wide receiver versus cornerback matchup here according to PFF. And the Buccaneers are also 4th DVOA versus the pass, only allowing 35.9 DraftKings points for into wide receivers. But I think most of the damage here is going to be done from Allen Robinson more than likely, and I think he'll be okay. It's a showdown slate, so just give me the talent in Allen Robinson, and I think he'll be fine. And if the Bears do happen to be trailing quite a bit in this game, I think Robinson should be able to show up in garbage time, even if it does take him a little bit. Then dropping down to the other stud wide receiver in this game, we have Mike Evans at 9,400. He's coming off a pretty strong game last week, although he is dealing with a bit of an injury, but it sounds like he's going to give it a go on Thursday night, which is good because Chris Godwin's not going to be playing. Neither is Justin Watson, so Mike Evans is kind of a necessity out there for Tom Brady. And he's an okay option. I mean, Mike Evans can be pretty boom or bust, but he should overall be fine here, especially without Chris Godwin. 6.5 targets per game this season, over a receiving touchdown per game, 57 receiving yards per game, which isn't great, 17% target share. In the matchup versus Chicago, it's not great. They're 50 VA versus the pass, 29.4 DraftKings points allowed per game to wide receivers. And like I said, none of these guys are really in good spots because both these defenses are pretty strong. But we just can't simply fade them. If this was the main slate, sure, we could fade this game. But we have to pick players from this game. Mike Evans, Allen Robinson, very talented wide receivers. And sometimes you just got to take the volume and the talent and just hope the matchup they can beat the matchup. Which a lot of the times they can tend to do that. Chris Godwin, 8,400. He is not playing, so you can't play him. Scotty Miller, 7,000. You got to have some interest in Scotty Miller just because Justin Watson and Chris Godwin are out. So he's going to get a bump in usage. And we saw last week he had a pretty solid game where he had 19 fantasy points on 83 receiving yards, got into the end zone, and had 7 targets. But he's also questionable. So pretty much everyone on Tampa for the wide receivers is hurt and playing or not playing, or also Scotty Miller is actually questionable for this game. I'm pretty sure Mike Evans is as well. But pretty much the entire receiving group for the Buccaneers is gimpy for the most part. So might be a little bit tough sledding here for Tom Brady with his guys all hurt, but I think he'll be fine. And Scotty Miller, assuming he gives it a go, he's viable just because there's a lack of options here for the wide receivers and some injuries, and he's okay. Again, the Bears are pretty good versus the pass. I'm not going to just keep repeating the statistics on how they are versus the pass, but just know, not a great matchup, but just volume alone, Scotty Miller is playable. And then we have the other Miller here in Anthony, who's okay, but he's not really a high volume option on the season. He's getting less than 5 targets per game. Has gotten to the end zone a couple of times, but he's kind of just like a boom or bust guy for the most part. Only 33 receiving yards per game. Does have a 20% market share of the team's air yards and an 8 out of 15.4. So he might be able to hit a long ball, but I'm not expecting too much out of Anthony Miller, but he's fine. He's fine. I'm not saying you don't play him, but I'm not expecting big things from Anthony Miller. Darnell Mooney, he is questionable for this game, but it sounds like he is more probable than he is questionable. And at 4,600, he's fine. He's actually seeing some volume. He's getting nearly 5 targets per game so far, 36 receiving yards per game, has a near 13% target share, 8 out of 12.9, so I think he's okay. And he actually saw 9 targets last week, and if the defense is going to be more worried about Allen Robinson, I mean, a couple of these guys like Darnell Mooney, Anthony Miller might be able to run free a little bit, so I think he's okay if he's going to give me a handful of targets. If he gets 9 targets at 4,600, I'll take that all day. I'm not sure if we can expect that again, but if you're looking at the targets prior to that, 5, 3, 3, I think we're going to see like anywhere from like 3 to 6, 3 to 7 targets, maybe if we're lucky. So I think Mooney's fine at that price point, but again, beware the matchup. It's not very good. Justin Watson, 2,600, he is out, so you can't play him. Cornell Patterson, more of a gadget player, but he's kind of used as a running back and a wide receiver, but it doesn't usually equate too much. Could he potentially hit on a big play? Sure, but that's just like a boomer bust nature of Cornell Patterson. At 2,200, I'd rather just play one of these cheap $200 wide receivers, and you can probably get similar production, especially with all the injuries on Tampa Bay. A couple of these guys are going to get some run for sure, and they're dirt cheap, so not really too interested in Cornell Patterson, but if you're building a bunch of lineups, I mean, you could always find the end zone or just bust a big play randomly. Ted Ginn, $800 on the Bears. He's going to get a target or two, but he's definitely not a high-volume guy, and I'd prefer some of the guys below him. But on the season, only 1.5 targets per game, not very good. And overall, the numbers just aren't that pretty for Ted Ginn. Does have an 8 out of 20.2, which is pretty good, but like if he hits on a deep ball at $800, yeah, it'll work out, but it's a very risky play. Javon Wims, 200. Mickens at 200. Tyler Johnson at 200. Riley Ridley at 200. And John Hurst at 200. A couple of these guys I think are going to pay off. Well, definitely not John Hurst because he's on the IR. But the guys I have the most interest in, I do like Tyler Johnson quite a bit. He's $200. Nothing so far this season, but he's going to get some definite work in the slot here with no Justin Watson or no Chris Godwin. And at $200, he's actually going to grade out pretty well for me. I think he's going to catch a couple of balls here. He's certainly going to get a handful of targets. And at $200, I will take that all day. So definitely a pretty strong value play on this slate. And then the other guys, they might get a target or two, but you're just kind of hoping you get a little bit lucky. But definitely like Tyler Johnson at only 200. And we'll move on to the tight end position. Nothing too pretty here. A bunch of old guys for the most part. Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski. These guys were some of the best tight ends in fantasy football quite some time ago. Now they're just old and dusty. But Jimmy Graham actually hasn't been awful this year. He actually has had some production. If I can pull up his game log really quick. Jimmy Graham's had a couple of decent games. In week 1, he scored 11.5 points. Week 2, he only scored 2. But then 24 versus Atlanta, although pretty much everyone does good versus Atlanta. We saw Tanyan score 3 touchdowns versus Atlanta. Then last week versus Indy, a pretty tough defense. He did have 7.3 fantasy points. I think he'll be okay here. The targets have been fine. He had 7 in week 1, only 1 in week 2, but then 10 in week 3 and 5 last week versus Indy. Looking at the overall numbers this season, they're okay. 5.5 targets per game and 14% target share. Not really a high 8 out or anything, but he's okay. He might be able to slip his way into the end zone. That's really the only way he's going to pay off. Now, if you're looking at the tight end versus linebacker matchup here, it's pretty awful here versus Tampa, and they're only allowing 10.2 Draftkings points per game to tight ends and only 50 receiving yards, so I'm not expecting a huge game from Jimmy Graham, but the volume's going to be there, and I think he's fine. And again, he could always find himself into the end zone. Rob Gronkowski at 5,800. Kind of a mixed bag with Gronk. It seems like he has an okay game, and then he just disappears. It's kind of what he did last week, looking at his game log. So he's 5,800. 3.9 points last week. He only caught 1 ball for 29 yards. He had 3 targets. But week 3, that's when people are getting a little bit excited about Gronk because he scored 10.8 points on 6 catches on 7 targets. But I don't know. It's just hard to trust Gronk. With it being a showdown slate and a lot of casual fans playing it, they're probably going to play Gronk just because it's Gronk. He's got great name value. They're going to pair him up with Tom Brady. But man, he is certainly a shell of himself these days, and even before he retired and came back, he did not look like himself. But Gronk's okay. I mean, if he's going to give me a handful of targets, it's fine. No Chris Godwin, no Justin Watson. He's going to be somewhat involved, but I don't expect anything too huge. Only 3.5 targets per game. Does have an 11% market share of the team's air yards and an 8 out of 10.8, which is over double than Jimmy Graham. So he might be able to hit on a random big play. He does have a pretty big tight end versus linebacker matchup here, according to PFF. And the the Chicago Bears are allowing 13.5 DraftKings points per game to tight ends and nearly a receiving touchdown per game. So that's not the worst spot for Gronk. And at 5,800, he's certainly my player pool. Cameron Brate, not a high volume guy, did catch a touchdown last week, but not someone you can expect to be too highly involved. Now, O.J. Howard being out, that certainly gives him a bump, and I should have mentioned that with Gronk as well. So that's kind of helped Gronk in the passing game too. So no O.J. Howard, no Chris Godwin, no Justin Watson. Mike Evans and Scotty Miller are both banged up. So these guys are going to get a couple of targets here, and certainly a boost for them. Cameron Brate, not a high volume guy, but he could always slip into the end zone like he did last week. And Demetrius Harris, he's $400. He's getting nearly 2 targets per game. Maybe he catches a touchdown. Can't really expect it, but he's going to be somewhat involved, and he's pretty cheap at $400. And the rest of these guys, you're just hoping they catch a random touchdown. And look, O.J. Howard, the numbers look good at $200, but again, he is not playing, so you can't use him. But I mean, some of these guys might catch a ball like Tanner Hudson, but it's just a little gross down there. Then moving on to the defenses, I think this is going to be a decently low-scoring game, so they are certainly both viable, and they are good defenses. You got the Buccaneers at $5,400. They are the favorite, so it'd make more sense to play them. But the Bears at $4,400. We've seen Tom Brady throw a pick six this year and make some errant throws. At only $4,400 at home, that's not too bad. They only have a 23.75 implied T total against them, but both these defenses are certainly viable because the offenses, I don't think, are going to set the world on fire, and they're both good versus the run and versus the pass. And the kickers, if you think they're going to be able to move the ball but not get into the end zone too much, that would mean a good game for the kickers. Ryan Suckup and Cairo Santos are certainly viable for $4,200 and $4,000. I guess I would prefer Suckup just because they have the higher team total. But you're kind of just splitting hairs with kickers and just hoping they make their field goals or get in position to get field goal attempts and get their extra points. But both are fine here. But I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. And I'm going to have so today is Wednesday. This video will be posted late Wednesday, early Thursday. And then I guess the next video will be the final thoughts video. And then I'll get my core plays video out on Saturday night as well. I also have my NASCAR video posted on Friday morning, more than likely. So you can be on the lookout for that if you guys want to play some NASCAR DFS. But that's pretty much going to be it. I hope you guys enjoy your Wednesday night or Thursday. Whenever you're watching this video, I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully this is a pretty good game. Hopefully it's more high scoring than I think it's going to be. And hope you guys' fantasy teams do very well.